It's so funny to me that people think I'm like a full-time content creator. I've been doing some sponsored stuff recently, and they'll email you back and they're like, hey, can you get this video edited and out by tomorrow? I'm like, actually, I'm at work right now. If you give me like one more day on that, I could do this tonight. And they're like, oh, okay. Or like, I just did a very cool thing, and they were like, oh, where are you coming from? I was like, oh, I'm on break at my job. I came from there. I only have like an hour and I got to get back. And they're like, oh, job, you're not full-time content creation? I'm like, no, I'm not. I personally forget how much money people actually make doing this stuff because I'm like not in the same realm. In reference to the anime man telling Hassan that One Piece isn't political, 2 years ago I was a guest on the Paramecia fan cast, which is like a One Piece fan podcast, and we were talking about this very thing. I'll stitch the video that I put up about it, but here's what we were saying. Ooh. Yeah, but like One Piece is aggressively like the people who have the money are abusing the people below them. And it's like, specifically like what recently, right? In the recent chapters where it's like the Celestial Dragons, because of the events at the Reverie, don't have their tributes, they don't have the money in this revolution, and so people are, there's a revolutionary army.
Yeah.
Like,
it remains so funny to me that as we watch like revolutions and political turmoil across the globe, right? And the Straw Hats Jolly Roger has become a symbol of revolution worldwide, and people are still like, no, One Piece, political One Piece. And the thing is that One Piece is not subtle, not even like a little bit. It's not like you have to like read between the lines. It's so over the top with its messaging, and it's like, how do you have to be wanting to ignore the fact that it's like a political piece of media about the abuse of power and revolutions and the power of people banding together. Like, you have to want to not see that.
Leftists are purely testing Gavin Newsom. That is evil.
Hassan must have opened his mouth again.
Oh my god, he's not progressive. Calm down.
I just made a video about Gavin Newsom like 3 days ago, saying how the narrative around him being transphobic or him being anti-homeless people or even hating homeless people kind of come out of nowhere. In that video, I went through at least 12 pieces of legislation that are pro-LGBTQ that significantly help trans people, and also all the investments that he's made and legislation passed into helping homeless people. What do you think this guy's justification was for saying Gavin Newsom was evil? In my last video, I mentioned how these people always use optics rather than actual policy to represent a person's views. That's exactly what he did. Justifying saying Gavin Newsom is evil, he talked about the photo op. I've already said the photo op is cringe, but that's your justification for saying he's evil? Clearly, I didn't do a very good job breaking down Gavin Newsom's record in my last video. So let's talk about some more. How about making California a sanctuary state for trans individuals, also providing gender-affirming care for minors? How about nearly doubling the amount of sick leave that workers are allowed to have in California? Opening up sick days from 3 to 5 days a year.
Governors can't write laws. They can't write legislation. It's not within their constitutional power. It's fun to dunk on people online, but either you don't understand this aspect of civics or your audience does it and you're taking advantage of that. I'm not trying to be pretentious or rude. It's just the truth, all right? You're giving the credit of the California state legislature over to Governor Gavin Newsom. But what the governor does have the power to do is veto any law that comes across his desk. And in a place with a Democratic supermajority like California has, where both the House and the Senate are Democratic and the governor is as well, a lot of legislation gets passed through. And you can tell a lot more by the way that he decides to govern by what he chooses to veto and by what big issues he chooses to push and how he chooses to push them. But first off, we're going to do a quick little Schoolhouse Rock civics lesson. We have 3 branches of government. This applies to both the federal and state level. We have the executive branch. These are your seats of power. This is your president. This is your governor. All right, we have the judicial branch, which is the system of courts heading all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then we have the legislative branch, which is your representatives, your senators. And those are the people, the legislative branch, who write legislature, who write your laws. They decide on them, they vote on them. If it votes and gets through the House, then it goes to the Senate. And if it gets to the Senate, it will cross the executive branch desk, and the governor or the president simply signs off on it, or they veto it. Governor does get the power to create the state budget. They set that up and then it gets voted on by the legislature. They also have the power to veto any law that comes across their desk, and they also use their position to push for big agenda issues, leveraging their power with the budget. Gavin Newsom has made his big ticket agenda dealing with the homelessness crisis in California, and so when people are talking about the way that he treats homeless people, they are not doing this just based on some online leftist agenda or just a single individual photo op. They are talking about his actual policy and the way that he governs. People joke consistently that Gavin Newsom hates 2 things: homeless people and Republicans, and he's all out of homeless people. That did not come from nowhere. The quick side note is, yes, I called Gavin Newsom evil explicitly for that photo op because I don't find it simply cringe. I find it cruel and evil to, as a governor, go to a homeless establishment, right? Just like an encampment. Show yourself physically tearing it up, some of the most vulnerable people in our society, for the sake of a publicity stunt. To me, that is beyond cringe. It is deeply, deeply cruel. So the good news is that California is a housing first policy state, meaning that the ideal in which they do their legislation when it comes to the homelessness crisis is that housing is the first thing you need to provide to deal with it, which is something I'm a big fan of. I will always be behind housing first policy. However, with the way that Governor Newsom governs, there is an exception. The exception is that Gavin Newsom has put his foot forward first into punitive measures for encampments. And a lot of people will go and they'll try to rebut this and say, well, Christian, encampments are unsafe and they do make a city ugly. This does not, however, separate the cruelty of people who do not have homes being uprooted and penalized for just having to exist somewhere. Using punitive measures towards people in encampments does not help their safety, their mental well-being, and does not provide them with housing, especially when our shelter systems are not designed for long-term support. What it does, however, is uproot them, cause additional mental strain, and subject them to police brutality. The governor has the power to leverage the budget to push for certain policy. He is currently asking cities to put in ordinances that will not allow encampments to be up for longer than 3 days. Otherwise, it will be punishable by the law. And the way that he is doing that is he's threatening to withhold money that is supposed to come from the state to provide for homeless shelter funding if people are not also willing to use the force of the police to remove encampments. So yes, while he talks the talk of wanting to end the homelessness crisis within California, he is also putting in direct policy to harm those people physically, and showing up to do photo ops. It's not some made up leftist idea. This is his policy, and he's standing on business in it, and people understand that and they see it. It's not a lie. So to round this back to the point of vetoing, you listed a lot of legislature that was pushed by the California state legislature during his tenure as governor, but once again, he cannot write laws. He does have the power to veto them, and so let's look at what he's chosen to veto as a way to get a sense of his general feelings on policy. A quick aside is that discernment is the job of the governor. Sometimes legislation gets passed that there genuinely is not money for. However, looking at his vetoes, especially when they are vetoes of things that will not cost the government a lot of money or any money at all to implement, is worth taking a look at. All right? Okay? Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have expanded the statute of limitations for people who were victims of childhood SA at juvenile facilities to sue. He quotes his reason of this being that it would have allowed the statute of limitations to be big enough for places that had lost, or rather cases that had lost key evidence. People suspect, you can't say specifically, people suspect it was because of the millions of dollars for which state institutions had been sued because of childhood SA. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have improved and expedited access to gender-affirming care at a time where multiple states are absolutely blocking access to gender-affirming care. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have allowed undocumented students to work or do work study at the university or colleges that they attend. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have allowed news organizations to bring cameras into prisons and interview inmates, as well as give access to lawmakers and state officials to prisons for the sake of transparency and oversight. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have required high schools to provide condoms to students. Vetoed a bill that would have required homelessness programs to more closely track and report spending data. Governor Newsom put in a bill that would have protected people from caste discrimination in employment. Governor Newsom vetoed a bill that would have decriminalized psychedelics, stating that there were not enough guidelines in place to make this clear. It just makes it to where people wouldn't get arrested for using it. To clarify, decriminalization means that it doesn't make it legal to sell that substance, however, that users would not be sent to jail for using it. Newsom vetoed a bill that would have given certain unemployment benefits to striking workers. Newsom vetoed a bill that would have allowed for gender identity to be considered in custody cases, meaning that whether or not your parent affirmed your gender identity could be something considered in custody cases, not the deciding factor, just something that could be considered. He vetoed that. Newsom vetoed a bill that would have put regulation on driverless trucks, semis that drive themselves in the transportation industry. And there are so many more examples, literally hundreds. It's his job to veto things, but there are literally hundreds of examples of things like that where you can see where and when he makes his policy choices. Also, a big policy that he's been trying to push is the increased funding for his state border patrol agencies. All of this is to say is that this isn't some online purity testing bullshit. His policy is his legacy. People know him through what he has done. And there are aspects of that are good, and there are aspects of that are bad, but he is far from a progressive, right? What that means is that people who hold similar political opinions to me are opposed to the idea of him as president, not to the idea of him trolling Republicans on Twitter. Trust me, it's funny and fun to watch. I love that he's getting under their skin, especially the whole Gavin derangement syndrome thing. And also the redistricting of California as a response to Texas's gerrymandering is great political strategy. That is what we want to encourage. However, this doesn't mean that that man needs to be president, or that talking about his history as a governor, his history as a mayor, who he is, like, that's what happens when someone sets themselves up to be in charge of the most powerful seat in the world. I've run out of time for this video, but a lot of people have asked me, oh, well, who are you thinking? What are your options? There are many people who are going to run in the primaries. There are many people who are going to have the option to choose between supporting. Okay, if you want me to make some video about perspectives right now, I think that's wild, but we could. However, you don't have to pick the one guy because his tweeting is